Hi y'all, my name is Jemima Joél and today we're here at the Front Gallery in New Orleans in the Ninth Ward, and I'm going to be taking y'all around room 1 where I have my installation and exhibition up. It's called Getting to Higher Education, Come Hell or High Water. This tells the story of a horrible policy in New Orleans that stopped Black children from receiving any public education above 5th grade. The New Orleans School Board decided to eliminate 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and we did not get those grades back until 1909. So we're going to be exploring our fight and our resistance toward these damning policies that happens back in the year 1900. Now let's take a look.
We outside. We outside. We outside. We outside. We outside. We outside.
So welcome to the wall, the story of Judy Wall. And so the story of Judy essentially is telling about this historical policy from the New Orleans School Board, but it's telling it through the eyes of a fictional character named Judy. Now, to give you some historical context of what's going on at the time is that we're just beginning some of the beginnings of Jim Crow laws. So the Reconstruction period has just ended, and so a lot of the progress that we had towards different things like educational policies is now being dialed back because now we're having these terrible segregation type of laws that are dialing a lot of the things back for Black folks. So here we meet Judy first, and so Judy is studying in Miss Mildred's arithmetic class, and so we're thinking about those 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, all these things. And so we can see how Judy is just really excelling in class. She's up at the board, she already has her chalk with her, and she is basically doing some long division. Well, she's really doing some short division at this time. And then we meet a lot of the class characters here, and we're gonna see them in the third painting that we'll have. But we have some people that are just, writing, thinking, he's counting. We have some too that are like playing violin at the back, making faces at each other, just really creating that classroom culture. And, not only is education going on in the room, but social experiences, the learning of one another is happening in the room. And then lastly, we meet Miss Mildred. Miss Mildred is their teacher, and she's gonna be the one that has to kind of show them and open up to them about what is gonna happen within their education. So now we meet Judy in her home life, and we can always tell it's Judy, once because of the features that I really tried to keep consistent within her, but then also we have a little red heart there. So Judy always has some form of a red tone on. Now at her home life, we see she's playing with her little brother, and it's showing you the dishes are dropping in the kitchen, what the kitchen is. And then we have her parents. So this is really the focal point throughout this painting here, is that they are having an argument. And so you're wondering what about? So they're essentially arguing about Judy's ability to go to school. So her father, he comes from the generation before. So that is the generation of children grow, but they grow to work. Back then, somebody might have only received up to a 5th grade education or a 3rd grade education, or really sometimes in occasions, no education at all. We're talking about the Jim Crow South. And so for him, he really doesn't see that so much as a priority. He feels like she's had enough and now it's time for her to go to work with you as a maid. But, as we can see, this is kind of the landscape of what's happening right now. They're trying to dial education back so that most Black children can get back into domestic servitude, rather than going into education, and therein you're creating more opportunities for yourself. You're learning to read, you're learning different forms of math that will really help you out in life. And so it's not that he's trying to enforce these things, but to him, that is a normal way of growing up. Now her mother is trying to fight against this, and she's saying, no, Judy is doing good in school. Why would we take her out of this structure? Judy is growing up in a different generation. So that means that education is at the top priority for her. Even reading in the book that I read by Heather Andrea Williams called Self-Taught about early African-American education, the year right after slavery, we see education is becoming so prioritized that people are even prioritizing education over even food during those weeks. And so Judy is part of that generation where education is priority. Education is something to go out and get so that you'll be more educated in this world. So This here is the next painting. This is scene 3, and so this is one of my favorite paintings because it looks like a chalkboard, and I kind of played off of that with different yellows and greens and trying to provide it some real balance within that school board chalk look. And there's writing across the walls, and once again we have cursive writing, you know, which we used to teach our children back in the day. Is just, you know, something that was really important to us as a culture. And I feel like it probably has something to do with the fact that, you know, learning how to sign your name was a really important passage into society. Knowing how to sign your name to get somewhere, to go somewhere, was really important, you know, to have a signature, have something to be known by. So this painting here is where the children are finding out that 6th, 7th, and 8th grade has been eliminated. So this, you know, classroom for them is like their last form of school that they'll be able to go into. You only were able to go into another tier of education if your parents had money to afford tuition at a higher, you know, education facility. But that makes education, you know, private instead of public. And so the teacher is reading that news from the Daily Picayune, a 1900 newspaper article, which we'll see around the room that is actually a real article. And so from that, I pulled some of the, you know, pieces from the article as far as believing color education was getting too similar to white schools. So as you can see, the children are not crying in this piece. And so that is something that was really important for me to document. And I was watching The Learning Tree, a film by Gordon Parks, and just noticing that, you know, the children didn't really cry in that film. And I feel like that has a lot to do with the idea that this was a normalized general part of life, you know, that, hey, these people come, we doing something, and they come and they take it from us. And, you know, it's still very similar to what we have today with the administration with Trump, you know, trying to take away certain African-American museums, trying to defund them, trying to take names like, you know, Harriet Tubman off of these, you know, always trying to dial it back. But as we know, there's still so much history that we have to tell. And so that's why it's still so important to tell this history. And lastly, I do want to point out that the words resistance, control, love, pushing are all words that are very, I guess, symbolic of this painting here. So this here is the next painting. This is scene 4. And so this painting is really sad for me. You know, it's kind of harder to talk about than the ones I was just talking about before. And that is because Judy is now in the life of domestic servitude. So here, Judy's mother resurfaces, and we see her going into work with her mother. It's probably a reference that I probably kind of learned from that film, The Help. Like, you know, before you go to work on your own, you might go with your mother at first and kind of like learn the rounds of what it is to work, you know, within a white person's household, and some of the manners and etiquette that you have to do to be able to survive the social construct that you're in there. And so the unique part about this painting is that Judy is actually kind of leaning over and reading the newspaper that I guess we'll call this the wife. I don't believe that mistress might not have been a term that's used within this historical context. But so she's reading a little bit of her article. And so one thing that we cannot take from Judy that we've seen from her being able to get that education is that she has the skill of learning how to read. Knowing how to read is able to inform you on possibly anything that's going on to society, you know? So, and symbolically, this painting is kind of just like a really beautiful picture. And so I guess what provides contrast to that is this here. I decided to just put something that says, keep reading the newspapers. Go back and read the newspapers. They're real and they're on the wall too. And so this is something for those who come and view my exhibition. It's something to kind of give a signal of like, you know, you might get lost in the beauty of this painting and kind of forget about, you know, what it is that we're talking about here, but kind of something to redirect. Now, lastly, there's just beautiful elements of nature, like there's a beautiful swing set in the back and some distant grass that I really enjoy. And some of the china, I kind of enjoy a little bit of the technique of kind of making it a bit of a watercolor touch, but it's really acrylic. I'm an acrylic painter. And I also enjoy some of the penmanship work that I did here, which was really using gel pens and alcohol pens to kind of create some texture that makes it look like it's, you know, a beautiful lace throw across the table. So this here is, wow, it's one of my favorite compositions, I believe, just because of the idea of some of the perspective within the doors. So there's one room back here, and then here's the hall, and then here's the hall that Judy is standing in. And so the point of that really is to kind of show some of the isolation that's within this piece. So now Judy is fully grown. She's a grown girl now. We see, you know, she came from this little girl to this grown woman. And so she's out in the hallway and she's reading a newspaper once again. And so this is a fictional newspaper, unlike the, you know, the Daily Picayune, which was realistic, but it's also a nod to Verite News, which is a news outlet that I read every day in New Orleans for Southern Louisiana, Southern American news. And so this one is called La Tribune des Vertes. So it's a fictional newspaper, but Judy is now reading about the fact that 6th, 7th, and 8th grade has been reopened. And so it's been 9 years, essentially. And so she is reading that the community also have been working together with people that will learn about Henderson Dunn and Mary D. Coghill from the Color Educational Alliance. They're working towards this freedom, once again, freeing up that education that was closed down. And so within this little newspaper, it's very much a nod towards current events that was going on at the time. I kind of just looked up like what was other stuff that was happening during this time, and then I found some really cute stuff like Mary D. Coghill. She was the principal of Bayou Road School, and so it's saying that they're hiring colored female teachers. They're still hiring. The Zulu Social Aid and Pleasure Club, they were having they were preparing for their first appearance for Mardi Gras. And then it's kind of like nodding to like, oh, the Color Education Alliance, they're organizing. And there was also a Phyllis Wheatley club. So there was a club after a writer, and they sewed and prepared things for orphan children and just did things for the community. And then the last piece I would talk about, or the last part I would talk about in this painting is this trunk here. And so this trunk, I was informed that it looks like the thin blue line flag that was in support of police during the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I kind of finished creating that look, but I put leaves and like blood on it to kind of just symbolize blood on the leaves, you know, blood on the leaves, strange fruit. So just symbolize strange fruit and kind of just talk about some of the you know, the not so good things that comes with supporting that type of flag. Now, scene 6 of this painting is one of my favorite scenes because now that Judy gets the news of those grades being reopened, she is ready to go grab her brother, and she's thinking about taking him back to school. You know, it's not really showing in the painting whether or not her brother did get any like education before, you know, learning about this. So, but it's not as important as the fact that these grades have reopened, and the fact that education is something that's still planted on Judy's mind, and she is going to go get educated who she can. And so she's going to go grab her brother out of the cornfields, and so kind of revisiting the idea once again that children, you know, grew up to labor. So he's laboring with his father, and most likely they probably would have lived on some sort of sharecropping, you know, plantation or probably something like that. So yeah, we see Judy once again in another beautiful red. This is one of my favorite, I guess, dresses that I did for her because it's so bright red. And some of the color theory in this painting is some of my favorites. I decided to do the sky orange. I feel like to maybe create a little more of a moody environment for this painting instead of like a blue, like really bright day. Like, I feel like this kind of makes it feel like it's more of a long time coming by setting it in this sunset. We see her little brother. So this is our first time seeing him again in the series. And so he's all grown up. So here he would be about 9 years old or about 10. And so he has a yellow corn. He has a blue corn, you know, pot. And so once again, some of that beautiful color theory that's really playing off of each other. And then we see the father again, which was kind of unexpected to see him again and kind of just see that he has a similar expression, a similar way about him that was in the last painting, you know, a bit stern, a little disconnected, you know, and that's most likely because of, you know, whatever has happened in his lifetime and how he's fathering his children probably has a lot to do with that. And then we see the farmhouse. We see the farmhouse out in the distance, and it was probably a lot of work trying to get that to still stand out while having so many different elements of green for those large corn stalks. And it was also kind of hard to get the brother to stand out too, but I believe something about having him against that red background too, he was able to be brought out a little bit more. So now we're here at scene 7, and so this is the last painting. I mean, I would have loved to have 8, but seven paintings is really what finished this series. And so this last picture is very rewarding in the sense of it's just Judy and her brother. So kind of filtering out everyone else that we've met during this course and just realized that one generation of education kept her so adamant about education that another generation will be exploring and experiencing education again. And then now we can kind of see that within his lifetime, even though it didn't come from his parents, well, really the mother was always encouraging that there's now a standard of education, and Judy's creating a certain standard of excellence for him that he now has to meet. And so she's taking him to school. And so here we see, once again, we have them in their colors, and we see a very beautiful, just bronze kind of golden sienna palette that's all across this painting. And so the building reference for this painting is actually the Joseph A. Craig School. So, I mean, they're not really going to the Joseph A. Craig School, but that is the building that I used to reference for this painting. So I just was in love with the architecture of that building. I just thought it was great. And so some of the brickwork I worked really hard on as well. And some of the elements of the fact that the painting on the sides is also brick and bush as well. Now for the readers, for the viewers, it once again brings you to think, okay, now Judy's brother is going to school, but what's next for Judy? So once again, this is called the story of Judy. And so I want my viewers to really grapple with the idea that this happened within her lifetime. She was getting an education. She was brought out of that into domestic servitude. So would she ever go back to school herself, do you think? I mean, Judy already has some of those basic elements of an education, learning to read, really one of the biggest things. And so when you think about this time, they would have had adults going to night school just in general to learn how to read. So the fact that Judy has this level of education, was she ever been able to go back into the school system and really think about how this one policy, these group of people, I don't know, the names of them, in the New Orleans School Board closing down 6th, 7th, and 8th grade education, what that did to one life. And so here I was able to allow my viewers to reflect, and they also answered a question of what would they want to see happen for Judy. So also get like a realistic idea of what they feel like she would have experienced, but also imagine as well. And yeah, someone says that they think that Judy would always still pursue education, even if it wasn't in a physical school system, and that one day she would become an educator. But yeah, a really cool fact is that teachers back in the day were born out of the simple aspect is that you had an education and that you were responsible for giving it to another because education was so vastly needed.
I've got me a New Orleans boy, lots of southern charm I adore, makes a green gumbo and he loves a good slang. I've got me a New Orleans boy, and he loves to call me baby, can be the feeling I'm going crazy. Love is good like gravy, can be the one that's feel like a lady. And he charms me and I love him, he brings me pecans in my candy.
So this wall here is honoring the Color Educational Alliance, and so these are some of the people that really resisted a lot of these policies and went to, structure or legislative ways to fight these policies. Here, the Color Education Alliance was founded in 1913, and so they also were organized to combat this specific law behind 1900 that we explored earlier with the story of Judy, and they were able to open the city's first black high school, which was McDonough 35. That school was originally on South Rampart Streets, and so if I didn't mention, it was opened in 1917. So the organization continued their work actually into the early 1950s, and they were able to successfully lobby turning underutilized white schools in New Orleans to black schools. Because once you're starting to found and operate some of the first black high schools, those schools are going to become overcrowded because there's so many people that are trying to get an education. And so they were able to do that. Now, into the 1950s, they were late 1950s, they started to phase out, because we have some of those larger national organizations like the NAACP that are going to come and, begin new advocacy in these neighborhoods and also start the issue of integration. And so this is really, once again, another significant part of this show is really to give homage to a lot of those early educational movements that even got us, up to the integration movement, which is a lot more popular for folks to speak about. But with my, artist statement and my artist practice, I really love to tell a little bit more undertold aspects of history. So these are some of the members of the Color Education Alliance. Here in these first two frames are the founding members, which was Henderson Dunn and Mary D. Coghill. And these people were also educators themselves. And they also went to Straight College or Straight University, which merged to later become Dillard U. So there's some of like the first, Dillard U alums. Now we have Lawrence D. Crocker. And so many of these people have schools in New Orleans named after them. And Lawrence D. Crocker actually did some guest teaching a couple times at Crocker. Now, Corn, they used to have a really good track team that we used to battle. But Walter L. Corn, Sylvanie Williams. Now, this is Pierre Landry, and just something important for Pierre Landry for me is that his son his son, L.B. Landry, they named L.B. Landry in Algiers, the first black high school on the West Bank after him. And that's where my dad went. And it just also, he was the first African-American to actually have a school named after him. So that is something that's really cool to me. And that was his daddy. And actually his daddy was educated on like the plantation's primary schools. I never had heard about a plantation having primary schools, and this probably would have been before the legal abolishment of slavery. So Samuel L. Green and Arthur Williams, which I didn't have portraits for them, but I still wanted to hold space for their involvement in this organization. And this is John W. Hoffman here, and so that was another educator, and he also has the Hoffman Early Learning Center in Central City. Now, lastly, on this wall, once again, we're speaking about some of the real people that were behind this. And so this is the real article that was behind this that I found. So essentially, this exhibition was also brought on by, I was reading an article by the United Teachers of New Orleans. And so that is where I first learned about this law. I'm sorry, it's not a formal law. It's actually a policy and a decision, which is also, worse the fact that, you're having to do things based off of something that's not even a technical legislative law. And so in this source, I printed out, it's from the Daily Picayune 1900, and it's telling you that they're eliminating higher grades. It's basically saying we recommend, therefore, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades be eliminated from the colored schools. It says, in regards to the number of children who may desire to go to higher school, they will find accommodations in private colleges and universities established there. From an investment of the subject, we have concluded that our colored school work should be reduced down to 5th grade as constituted today. And then it says, at present, the grades extend up and including to the 8th, and it has been sought to make work identical with that required of white schools. The result has been disappointing, some extent, and unsatisfactory to a larger degree. It was probably a mistake in the early organization of these schools to attempt so much or to expect so much of colored pupils. Besides, the records of the superintendent's office will show that barely 10% of attendance is colored schools, goes to the grammar grades, and nearly 90% go to the primary schools. grades. So they're basically saying more Black people are spending time in primary grades. Why are we funding their schools? While the cost of maintenance of the 2 grades is entirely out of proportion. So this is really deafening and really sad to read that, you know, somebody decided to actually sit and write this. And today in 2026, we can go back and read how chopping, you know, it's like chopping my head off. Like, you know, like, I do not believe in your ability to educate yourself. I don't even believe it's, you know, important enough for y'all people. And so we're just going to take it out, you know. And so it's beautiful that the Color Education Alliance and the people within that were able to fight against some of these things administratively and come together, women and men, and do some of these things to push forward our education for our children. So this is the last wall within my exhibition space, and it's actually a sneak peek into part 2 of my series next year. All the paintings haven't been made yet, but these are some of the beginning paintings of it. And so this series will focus on highlighting some of those first educational institutions that you could get that higher form of education. So we're speaking about high schools and universities that were accessible to Black folks in New Orleans. So we're going to be talking about Gilbert Academy, Booker T, 35, Landry. We're going to be talking about some of those first colleges as well: Leland University, Straight College, New Orleans, Clark, which is all these things. So this first painting is called Battle of the Skirts, Hike 'em Up. And so this is focused on St. Mary's Academy, which was also one of the first prominent spaces in which a lot of little Black girls would go and get education. And so this picture was found from a yearbook around the 1930s, 40s that I found in the New Orleans Public Library. And so it basically shows 3 girls standing in front of St. Mary's Academy of what it would look like back then. And it's interesting because, you know, it's just a picture, you know, and well, I wouldn't even say it's just a picture, but it's a still picture. And so with this painting here, it kind of allows the girls to kind of have a different life within a setting. And so this is essentially dedicated to long plaid skirts. I had to wear a skirt in high school, but we would all roll them up, because if not, you know, you would be called a grandma, I would be called a grandma, and so that is why I would roll them up, just so I wouldn't be teased, you know. But I mean, also, I ain't want to wear no long skirt either, you know. So it's like a form of rebellion and resistance for some of your femininity or your growing up and your growing up pains, you know. And so I had talked with one of my elders while I was creating this work, and I was just interested, wondering if, you know, she rolled up her skirts in her day too. And she was like, oh yeah, girl, we did that. You know, it's nothing new. So it kind of made me wonder, or, you know, I didn't know if it was appropriate at first, but kind of just take an older painting and kind of show like probably nothing new under the sun. You know, it's probably just a practice we've been doing for years. So that she's the leader, she's telling roll y'all skirts up before we go inside. And she's rolling it up like, oh girl, roll it up and hurry up. And then she's just kind of ignoring them and like rolling her eyes and kind of just resisting the whole, like, I guess, dynamic of whatever rolling your skirts up may mean socially for little girls. You know, we don't really know why. And this painting just keeps kind of a color palette of a dark blue and gold, so all throughout, in which I wore blue and gold growing up, going to school. I believe St. Mary's did too, so as well. And so then we have a school skirt here, and we have some old penny loafers, and just kind of trying to show once again like the amount of travel as well that you had to do to educate yourself, you know, walk long ways, you know, to get to different schools. Now this next piece right here is called Question on College Boys, and it's essentially based on Leland University. So Leland University actually used to sit on St. Charles Avenue, where Loyola and Tulane is today. So there was a historically Black university there. And so it was founded in 1870. In 1923, it had to be relocated out to Baker, Louisiana. You know, so sadly they were able to rebuild there on St. Charles. And interestingly enough, the school was never accredited. And so that's something very sad as well, is that a lot of early Black universities, you know, sometimes they're references as just colleges because they weren't ever able to get validation that they were like a real educational institution, you know, but we know that there were, and they were under a lot of strict standards. And so at Leland University, it was a strict Christian education. There was a strict just model of religion there. And so that's why I have this Bible sitting there just showing some of the strict religious elements of early education. So in this piece here, we see her walking to school, the main character. She's not named, like the other girls are, but she's just a girl, and I wanted to just show, a heavier set, dark-skinned woman and just put her in this painting. And so she's sitting with her parents, and so her parents would have been more privileged. They're able to pay for her to go and get a high school education. So before McDonald 35 opened in 17, we're looking at more like 1910. And so we can kind of see her father like schmoozing. He's sitting closer to the person in admissions and just kind of like talking his daughter up. And you can see they have very nice clothes on in this environment. And so it just shows an admissions room and what it might have looked like. There's a Holy Bible there, a pool table. And then later on, we see her actually admitted into the school. So she's standing with her same friend that we see in this painting, and they're just kind of like gushing over the boys, crushing over the boys, and they're walking. And one of my viewers actually pointed out some of the dandyism, the dandy elements of just New Orleans school uniforms, period. Like, you were really dandy. Like, you had a beautiful plaid skirt, and you had a lot of times like a feminine tie on as well. And so it just shows some of the dress that you had to dress like to be able to go to school was definitely a higher level of dandiness back then. But yeah, they're crushing on college boys on Valentine's Day.
So thanks, folks. That's all. Thanks for coming with me to the front gallery, learning about my exhibition, and wondering about the life of Judy and all the others. All of the folks that were getting education in that early Jim Crow South. Sometimes I still wonder about how difficult that may have been. Still looking for places to bring the story of Judy to. So if you know any galleries, museums, or schools in your city that would love to have the work of Judy, drop them in the comments. Bye.